A weirdly common problem in Final Fantasy XIV, possibly especially because of the age of the game combined with the amount of changes the game has got over the years, is that some players will claim that something is true without ever checking if it actually is. Either because they assumed it is the way they think, or because it was like that at some point. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where I and my friends highlight the odd claims and misconceptions players make, and test them to see whether they are true or not, while also explaining how you can test it yourself so you can learn how to science stuff in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. Of course Living Shadow benefits from Tincture, but only if done before summoning him, because he checks your stats on summon, of course. False. Right, so the claim kind of makes sense, because it includes an explanation as to why it works this way. However, Living Shadow is a pet, and so is EOS. This means that for this claim to be true, all temporary pets must work distinctly differently from EOS on this, and only this, detail. Now, you might be thinking, wait, but why? If your pets take a snapshot of your stats when they are summoned, then it means that EOS becomes stronger permanently, or at least until you use Dissipation or summon Seraph, if you use a Mind Tincture and then summon EOS. Because then EOS would have snapshotted your Mind Tincture boosted stats. Now, I'm sure you're not here exclusively to listen to me explain why a claim would be false. We can of course test this. Use Living Shadow and watch him fight a striking dummy. Don't do anything else, and simply watch. Next, use Living Shadow and then a Strength Tincture. If the damage is increased as a result, then the original claim is proven false, as this proves that Living Shadow scales real time with your stats. If, on the other hand, the damage is unchanged, then we have one more test. Use a Tincture, then Living Shadow. If the damage is increased, then the original claim is proven true. If the damage is unchanged, then not only is the claim false, but that would suggest pets are not affected by tinctures, or at the very least Living Shadow wouldn't be. Now, we can see here that without a tincture active, my Living Shadow's attacks average around 10,500 per hit. Take note that Shadowbringer has a higher potency for Living Shadow than all the other attacks. Next, we test again using a tincture after summoning Living Shadow. And we can observe here that the regular hits are distinctly over 11,000 damage consistently. This, of course, proves that tinctures work even if used after your pet is summoned. Here's the thing. We have previously proven in episode 4 of Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters that pets scale real time with buffs. This means that the only real question is whether a pet is affected by a specific buff or not. Just like your own attacks scale with whatever buffs you have when they're initiated, so do pet actions. I want to reiterate that if pets snapshotted your state when summoned, you have to remember that this would also apply to EOS, Scholar's pet, which could stay around forever. And I also want to underline that EOS is consistent in her mechanics compared to other pets, so it would be absurd if this one particular thing, she's different. Number 2. Pets do benefit from single target buffs, just not Dragon Sight for some reason. True. In episode 6 of Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, I tested the claim that pets don't benefit from targeted buffs, such as Dragon Sight, Astro Cards, and Standard Finish. This test was done exclusively using Dragon Sight, under the assumption that all targeted buffs must work the same. Turns out they don't. So for this test, we bring Bahamut and Phoenix back to test with their filler attacks, which do 150 potency 4 times. For the tests, it is important that you are in party with at least one other player of a different role than Mage to make sure the party bonus doesn't change between tests. For the test, we start by simply using Bahamut and Phoenix and observe their attacks for the baseline numbers. I get the impression their hits average around 4,600, but the important thing is really whether the numbers increase with the buffs. For the first test, have a dancer maintain the damage buff from Standard Finish throughout the duration of Bahamut and Phoenix. observe that the damage numbers average slightly higher. You know, around 5%. As a sanity check, you can also test again with Technical Finish. It being a full raid buff, it makes sense it would apply to Bahamut and Phoenix. We can see that the damage numbers are about the same, and slightly greater than the baseline notably. For the second test, bring an Astrologian instead of a Dancer. Don't bring both. Again, party bonus would mess with the numbers. Let the Astrologian draw a ranged card. This may take a while. Maybe bring a Lalafell or Pad for good luck while you're at it. Once the card is secured, use it during Bahamut and or Phoenix and observe the numbers. Again, it seems the damage is greater. We can once again sanity check our results with Divination, which grants the same damage bonus as our role-appropriate Astrologian card, but to the entire raid, so it should apply to Bahamut and Phoenix. We see the damage numbers are about the same, thus proving that targeted buffs like Standard Finish and cards appear to also extend to the affected player's pets, but just not Dragon Sight for some reason. Number 3. Does Dragon Sight stack with itself? Yes. Now, Dragon Sight, as we just talked about, turns out to be weird, like super weird in the way it works. For other buffs that you cannot stack, they will usually override each other's buffs. For example, 2 dancers partnering the same person and using Standard Finish will result in 1 damage buff for the target and 2 Esprit buffs, which help the dancers generate Esprit. Uniquely for Dragoon's Dragon Sight, every left eye stays on the target. Are they functional? Is then the question here. To test this, I use a Monk, simply because of their fast GCD, making it easier to test a single attack many times quickly. First, we attempt to find a baseline by mashing Dragon Kick a lot. Then we bring 1 Dragoon and gain left eye from them, and continue kicking to see the damage difference, which is obviously there as expected. Then we bring 1 more Dragoon to get 2 left eyes, and observe if there is a damage difference. From what I can tell, there is one, but you know what would make it even easier to tell? Bring a 3rd Dragoon. If there is actually a difference, then approximately 10% more damage from 2 extra left eyes is a lot more obvious than just 5% from 1, as it makes it easier to tell if it is just a matter of damage variance. Of course, you could push this to the absolute limit with 7 Dragoons, but for this test, I was lucky to gather 3 on such short notice. Nonetheless, with 3 eyes, I was able to direct crit nearly 22,000 damage, where with 1 eye, I never managed to land anything passing 21,000. A much greater percentage of attacks also seem to break past 10,000 hits with more eyes. In other words, Dragon Sight stacks with itself, which isn't surprising because Dragon Sight does not override itself. In regards to the doesn't work on pets observation, I imagine it may be a relic from back when Dragon Sight required you to be within a certain range of the Dragoon. Given that the buff was very interested in the exact location of the recipient, it makes sense that it doesn't extend to the pet, since the pet could be even further away. Back then, Dragon Sight also had a rather imposing beam from the Dragoon to the recipient, which of course would never appear to also connect to the pet. Number 4. Do XP boosting earrings work in Eureka, Bozja, etc.? No. So, there's 2 different ways this question makes sense. Does an XP boosting earring boost the XP you gain in Eureka for your level in Eureka when killing random mobs? And does an XP boosting earring boost the XP you gain for your actual job when you gain XP in, say, Bozja? Given that my character is already fully leveled on regular jobs, you will have to trust my word on one of these things, because I cannot demonstrate it. However, I can demonstrate the other one, and I can explain both. So let's start by demonstrating in Eureka. When you kill enemies in Eureka, among other things, you gain elemental experience points, which are distinctly different from normal experience points, apparently. All these different XP boosting options in the game affect normal experience gain, which means that they will not affect elemental experience gain. I'm sure we can agree that this kind of makes sense. Now, for the second part. In Bozja and other alternative experience gain methods like deep dungeons, you don't actually get experience for killing mobs. In the case of deep dungeons, at least not in the normal sense. You only get experience for doing certain tasks, like skirmishes and critical engagements in Bozja and Zadnor, and clearing the deep dungeon in case of those. Neither of these are considered XP from defeating enemies. Why does that matter, you might ask? While these kinds of XP boosting items like the Azemes earrings or even the Bozjan earring itself don't outright mention this, they actually only boost XP gains from defeating enemies. This means that the only type of XP they enhance is the XP gained from killing a regular mob in the open world, or the XP gains from killing a boss in a duty. Notably, the XP for killing the boss itself. This means that when you do leveling roulette, the earrings boost the XP gained from killing each boss, but not the leveling roulette XP bonus itself. This means that when you land in a low-level duty, these boosts are relatively tame, because the XP from killing bosses in Sastasha is extremely low, and boosting that by 30% isn't going to make it that much more impactful. And yes, let me just repeat that one. The Bozjan earring does not actually boost the XP you get from Bozja, for some reason. Number 5. Jumping can give an advantage when dodging mechanics, because jumping immediately changes your active position to your destination. False. This claim stems from the fact that when you start a jump, you are essentially already kind of locked into your moving direction, as you cannot change your pathing without some sort of assistance, where this assistance can be a movement action of your own, like elusive jump, or a rescue from another player, or, a boss knocking you back. The key here is that the logic is that because your destination is quote-unquote set in stone, the game supposedly already views your location as the destination. This is not true. After all, there are other ways to impede this destination, and the way the game actually works is that your location is updated just as frequently as it always has, even in the air. In fact, most boss mechanics don't actually care about your vertical position at all. You can see in this demonstration that every time the level checker uses reset, I jump with my destination clearly being outside the telegraph, meaning that if the original claim was actually true, this would have worked every time. Now, in reality, the only time it actually worked was the time where I was already outside the telegraph mid-air when the telegraph resolved. This kind of claim often gains some level of following because of cognitive bias. You remember the times where it worked, and when it doesn't work, you either ignore it or blame it on something else. Maybe I didn't jump fast enough, or something. Number 6. Tanks don't do 20% less damage than other roles. False. So this claim originates from the observation that back in the day, tanks could turn on tank stances that typically reduced their damage output by an explicitly stated 20%. Which of course meant you could avoid this by not using this stance. With the removal of these stances, there's nothing in the game that outright indicates that tanks do less damage than other jobs. Now, just checking in with the fact that pets do less damage than players, again with no evidence beyond the actual damage numbers. The game never states this, but it is true. As such, you don't need a passive to tell you if the damage numbers state otherwise. How do we prove that tanks do 20% less damage than other jobs? Well, take any tank with a basic GCD with a potency of 200. Incidentally, Samurai also has a basic GCD with a potency of 200 in Hakase. To make it as consistent as possible, remove all gear from your tank and your Samurai and use a weapon with similar weapon damage, and preferably either the same secondary stats or at least no determination or tenacity. Then, all you have to do is spam that 200 potency attack a bunch of times. For my test, I've decided to settle on these high steel weapons for level 62. You can see here that on my warrior, heavy swing deals around 340 damage per swing. Meanwhile, samurai deals closer to around 420, which is extremely close to 25% more. Now, a thing that makes Samurai excellent for this demonstration is that Samurai does not have any passive damage bonuses that could skew the result. By comparison, all healers, all mages, and all physical ranged do have some sort of passive damage bonus, and all the other melee DPS jobs have significantly greater potencies on their basic attacks compared to tanks and samurai. This kind of difference, where tanks just passively do 20% less damage, is consistent between all 4 tanks. And some players, listen closely on this one, some players believe that the tank mastery trait is actually the source of this minus 20% damage output. However, whether this is true or not is not important, as the minus 20% damage output exists all the same. I would like to thank Giraheen, Zav, and Tristan for helping with some of the tests in this video. Now, have you met some absolutely wild claims or myths about Final Fantasy XIV that you'd like to see tested? I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, back when tank stances reduced damage done, tanks also had damage stances that did the opposite. Warrior's Deliverance increased damage done by 5% and gained access to Fell Cleave. Paladin's Sword Oath made their auto attacks hit super hard, and Dark Knight, well, they could turn off Grit and not do 20% less damage, and they would also get access to Blood Weapon.